Wonderful. Well, thank you very much indeed, Richard, for the opportunity to talk today about AI and judicial determination. And may I first recognise the wonderful work that you and your colleagues are doing and across the law faculty at Oxford, the absolutely superb work that's going on. I was an undergraduate studying jurisprudence back in the early 90s, and it's just remarkable to see the success of the faculty over time. So much so that I did make an informal inquiry of one of the professors about whether I should consider doing something, a master's or the like, to which they said in a very polite Oxford way, "You're not really clever enough." So I realized that the standards have gone up considerably since I was an alum at the university, and well done on all that you are doing. My interest in courts and the future of courts really began back in about 2008, where I became involved in a court called the Dubai International Financial Centre Court. It was a new court, a brand new court. It was an English language court, a common law court operating in an Arabic language and civil law environment. And the first thing that we did was we did what's known as a public perception audit. What does the public know of this court that had been up and running for 3 or 4 years, if you will, behind the scenes? What do people know of it? And so we went out to lawyers and we went out to business people, and we said to them, what do you know of this amazing, incredible, future-looking, fantastic, swift, efficient new court, the Dubai International Financial Centre Court? Not a lot was the feedback. In fact, the best we got was, are you near fitness first? Now, that was true. We were near fitness first, but it was not exactly what we wanted to be known as a court. So we thought to ourselves, what could we do as a court that would be different? And one of the areas we decided to focus on was customer service. And that may sound peculiar. Not many courts had contemplated customer service. In fact, when we suggested customer service to courts around the world as being part of their KPIs, firstly, they asked what KPIs were. And secondly, they asked why should they focus on customer service? And they organized the most wonderful conference to debate whether or not the International Framework for Court Excellence should comprise any element of what the citizen wants from a court. And courts from all around the world flew to the most convenient location in the world to have such a conference in Auckland, New Zealand. And the International Forum for Court Excellence actually adopted the use of a measure of customer satisfaction, if you will, for a court. And as part of that process, in the DIFC court, there was a uniqueness, because in many courts, the parties might not be local. The parties might not be local. In Dubai, the parties weren't even in the same country. But that wasn't the unique element of the court. The unique element of the court was that the judges also weren't local. The judges were from all around the world. So we had a situation where we had judges from multiple countries and parties from multiple countries. And it led us to create what I believe is probably the world's first virtual court. We used it initially for small claims, but small claims for us was about up to 150,000 US dollars. So they were quite significant. And to do that, we had to build, this is back in 2010, a back end that allowed for a virtual court to operate. And we did it with Microsoft. And I do wonder if the essence of Teams really was a lot of the work that we did in building a virtual court with Microsoft. And what we realized that by building a virtual court and allowing online submission of documents, we were getting vast amounts of documentation. If you go back to originally, if you look at the English courts, if you wanted to submit evidence, if it was based on a document, you had to type that document onto a special court sheet. And so the number of documents submitted to court were very low. We then moved on to the world of photocopying. You had to submit paper documents to court. Again, the cost and the complexity of photocopying meant that, there were still lots of copies, but not perhaps as many as when you could digitally upload. And so I realized that as courts, we were starting to receive, if not terabytes, certainly tens of gigabytes of data related to the cases, and we weren't doing anything with them. We weren't doing anything with that data as a court. We weren't analyzing it. We weren't using it to help a judge. We were just letting it sit there, let the parties look at it. And that got me thinking about what the future of courts would be like. And I started working with the World Economic Forum, and particularly on their Justice Subcommittee and on the Rule of Law Subcommittee, and thinking about what justice might look like in the future. And that led to the creation of the Courts of the Future Forum, which we launched to some fanfare in 2017, looking at what courts will be when assets are purely virtual, when they exist on 1,000 nodes across 50 countries, where no court or arbitration center has authority to change the blockchain on which they sit, where companies are formed in the kingdom of Asgardia, over which no court can enforce its decisions. What will a court do? It has data, but it doesn't have access to enforce. And that led to the issue of the part 40,000 of the rules. And we called it part 40,000, which was the sort of rules of the courts of the future, because you have to travel at 40,000 kilometers an hour to break free of the Earth's atmosphere. And we realized that courts in the future are going to have to not just be automated, but they are going to have to transform, to break free of the some would say oppressive gravity, but certainly the history which has led courts to perhaps not be as efficient as they might be. And then when I returned to Oxford in 2018, I worked with others at the university to create the Deep Tech Dispute Resolution Lab. So let me now share my screen. Okay. All right, Richard, can you see that okay? That's lovely, thank you. But we're here today to talk about automatic justice, the role of AI in judicial determination. And to do that, I wanted first of all to look at what is an ideal judge. Now, Victoria, I'm stupid, I should have had your picture up there as an ideal judge. And I don't want to suggest that this judge is an ideal judge or not an ideal judge. It is just a picture of a judge. But I wanted just to explore, before we work out whether AI can assist the judiciary or even be the judiciary, let's start with what is an ideal judge. Many would say that an ideal judge has a solid legal knowledge. They are a good lawyer. That is seen as a prerequisite for being a judge. Others say that in addition to legal skills, they need analytical skills. It's not good enough to know the law, you have to apply the law. A judge should be able to analyze evidence and facts, complex legal issues, and to analyze witnesses. What do I mean by that? Many people think a judge should be a pretty good lie detector, because much evidence, certainly in common law jurisdictions, is dependent on humans telling the judge what happened. So analytical skills of the law, analytical skills of the evidence, and to that extent, analytical skills of people. That's what people think make an ideal judge. Impartiality, fairness, objectivity. Justice is blind, as the saying goes, and impartiality, a willingness to look at the facts of both sides and draw a determination. Accuracy. Now, this is very interesting, and I'd love to know Victoria's feedback on this afterwards. So I've been really interested to know how accurate a judge is expected to be. I mean, they're humans at the end of the day, right? Judges are humans. And so I ask people, how accurate do you want your judges to be? And invariably, the public say 100%. And I say, well, hang on a sec, are you 100% accurate in all of your decisions? No. I said, well, what makes a judge 100%? They've got the hardest things to decide, right? I mean, they're not dealing with whether they have semi-skimmed or full-fat milk. These are critical decisions that people haven't been able to get an answer to. That's why they've come to the court, right? So why do you think they'd be at 100% accuracy? And people look, they frown a bit, and they say, well, at least 95%. The reality is, and I've asked a number of judges about this, that they would hope to what you might call objectively get it right. That is, all their peers would look at it and say, yes, that's what I would have decided, about 80% of the time. About 80% of the time. There or thereabouts. Now, that is still a phenomenal degree of accuracy for some of the hardest decisions that a judge have to make. But I will tell you as an anecdote, I did ask a very senior judge, I said, what's your view on judicial accuracy? And they said, it's certainly the case that when you start as a judge, you're absolutely keen. You work late nights, you work at weekends, you look behind the evidence, you ask questions, you really are keen to get it right. And you would expect to get it right about 80% of the time in those situations. He said, but after 10 years or so, you've seen the lawyers before, you've heard the same type of cases before, you want your weekends back. And at that point, you expect to get it right about 65% of the time. He said, but there does come a point after decades of sitting as a judge where you get it right less than 50% of the time. And it's at that point as a judge that you owe it to the parties to toss a coin. And although that's a flippant, if you excuse the pun statement, the reality of it is we must not expect perfection from human judges or perhaps from technologically driven judges. The next one is speed. And the challenge with speed is we want our justice to be fast. Justice delayed is justice denied. We want justice delivered at pace. We want justice, if we've got a problem, we want it solved quickly, but not that quickly. Not that quickly, right? We don't want the judge to just toss a coin. We don't want the judge to skim over the papers and say, I think it's like this. We want to be sure that the judge has really understood what's going on, has listened to all sides, has read the papers, has explored with the lawyers, questions that have been unanswered. So we want speed, but we don't want too much speed from a human judge. And the other thing that people say they want from a judge is mercy. And this is almost a more subjective element, that sitting above the law and sitting above the facts and sitting above the evidence, that the black and white letter of the law or the guidelines or the rules sometimes need to be adjusted for compassionate reasons, merciful reasons, the humanity of justice. It isn't just about black and white. Often there's grey, and it's the interpretation of the judge that we rely on. In a sense, it's the compassion of the judge that makes the justice system so revered and respected. It throws a spanner in the works, if you will, of certainty around the judiciary, but many would say that mercy is a critical attribute of the justice system. And I can't say whether I agree or disagree with any of these. It's just what people have told me over the years that they expect from a judge. Now, the system is facing some challenges at the moment. And I wanted to first sort of put it out there that technology isn't there to enable change. Sorry, technology isn't there to drive change. Technology doesn't drive change, it enables change. So what are the drivers that we might see within the justice sector which would lead us towards the use of AI and technology? And I think there's a few at the moment. One is it's incredibly hard to get really good judges at the moment. We've seen the judicial retirement age up now in the UK to 75. It is incredibly hard to get the high caliber of judges that the system requires as the caseload and case complexity increases. So attracting the highest quality talent to the judiciary is not easy. And that's the same in the UK as it is all over the world. When I was president of the International Association for Court Administration, often I'd hear Chief Justices say, we're simply struggling to get the highest quality candidates as judges. The second one is backlog. I traveled to India and the Chief Justice was telling me that they had 29.2 million cases backlogged. I thought that was quite a high number until I went to Brazil, where they had 100 million cases backlogged. And not many countries are at that kind of scale of backlog. But post-COVID, we're seeing even in the most sophisticated of systems that there is a prediction around having significant case backlog. And we can't expect judges to work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, because it would be difficult for them to perform the highest levels of accuracy and on all those other criteria if we did. But we do have to find a way of overcoming the backlog. The next challenge is data. As I said to you, historically, the amount of information a judge had to pore over was reasonably limited, I suppose, to the photocopying department of the law firm. But now we are seeing examples of terabytes of data being delivered by both sides and relied upon. We're seeing discovery, electronic discovery, producing video and WeChat and WhatsApp and SMS and emails and Snapchat and all sorts of different forms of data, more complex data, multi-language data. There's a lot of data coming now for determination before the judiciary. And in that sense, we're seeing greater complexity. If we go back to judgments of, say, the commercial court from the 1800s, if they were 10 pages, that was long. And most of that was the facts. Now we're expecting our judges to deliver 30, 40, 50, 100, 200 pages. Now, part of that is that the cost of going to court is so high that the parties feel, particularly if they're paying, that they want the judge to do a really thorough job in writing up the decision. Part of it is a passion of the judge to explain their thinking for future generations, for future judges, and for Court of Appeal if necessary. But nevertheless, the job of a judge is much more complex than it's ever been before, in my view. And the last one, and this is a tricky one, is relevance. The relevance of the judiciary to the citizen, to the people, to the community that the judiciary serves. And for this, I want to refer to a quite brilliant organization based out of the Netherlands called the Hague Institute for Innovation of Law, run by a real pioneer called Dr. Sam Muller. And a lot of the research they've done is worth looking at. But one particular piece of research is about the justice gap, as they call it. I call it the justice chasm. And broadly speaking, it looks to 40,000 people around the world, I think was the number of people in the survey, a huge survey. And it said, if you have a serious legal issue, something so severe, it's keeping you up at night, you can't sleep, the pain of the legal issue, what would you do? How would you solve it? 16% would see a lawyer. Okay. What about the 84%? Why wouldn't they see a lawyer? Well, lawyers, they say, are expensive. They're not going to help me. They're going to turn this from a molehill into a mountain. People don't want to see lawyers. They don't like lawyers. They don't trust lawyers. That's a broad generalization. More worryingly, 95% of people wouldn't go to the state institution set up to help them. Why? It's not for them. It's only for powerful people, for rich people, for other people. And of the 5% that had been to court, of the people that had been to court, 70% were unhappy with the outcome or the process or just the system. They were unhappy. Now, I want to translate that into the health system. Imagine if someone was lying in bed at night in pain, physical pain, and 84% of people lying in bed with physical pain said, I don't want to see a doctor. Doctors aren't for me. And 95% said, I definitely don't want to go to hospital. And of the people that went to hospital, 70% said the experience in hospital was terrible. We would say that that was a failing health system. And to put this into context, the report suggests that 1 in 7 people every year have a serious legal issue around the world. That's 1 billion serious legal issues a year. 1 billion serious legal issues, of which the vast majority, people don't seek legal advice and they don't seek help from the courts. We have a really significant justice chasm. And in the context of AI and the ability to not only resolve backlogs, I want us to think about AI in the ability to help the 95% citizens around the world who currently don't through choice or otherwise, have access to justice or legal support. Can AI help? Well, we're going to look at AI in the context of legal knowledge, AI in the context of analytical skills, AI in the context of impartiality, AI in the context of accuracy, of speed, and of mercy. Those were the criteria. That's what people wanted from a judge. So let's start with legal knowledge. So can a computer compete with a human brain in terms of legal knowledge and processing that legal knowledge? Now, I imagine the reason you're on this call is because there isn't much doubt about that. I looked up, now this, I don't know how accurate this information is, but the human brain holds about 100 terabytes of information, according to the internet. And I'll say no more than that. But Titan, which is a quite historic supercomputer, although it was upgraded in 2013, holds 40,000 terabytes. So the human brain, 100 terabytes, supercomputer, 40,000 terabytes. I think we can all agree that computers can hold more information than humans in the brain, and we won't even get onto the cloud. In terms of speed, again, from the internet, the brain is 10 million times slower than a modern computer. 10 million times slower at processing than a modern computer. Now, I know that the brain is more creative than a modern computer. I know there's lots of reasons why the brain is an absolutely amazing organ in our body. But I don't want to spend too much time on whether AI can process and hold more information than a human brain of a judge. I'll move on from there. I do want to talk, though, to the next question that we wanted was about analytical skills. Can AI analyze information better than a judge? Now, this is incredibly hard to prove because for many cases, how do you demonstrate that the judge didn't analyze information well? So a lot of the research is around predictive models. If one pitched lawyers against AI, which would be better at predicting an outcome? And one well-quoted one is, I think it's owned by Thomson Reuters now, it's called Case Crunch. In Case Crunch, 100 lawyers were pitched against AI to look at the potential outcomes of PPI mis-selling claims in the UK. Quite complex cases going before, from memory, a tribunal, but in anyway, a quasi-judicial body. And the computers got it right 86.6% of the time versus the 100 lawyers who got it right 62.3% of the time. So there's some indication there that computers and AI were able to be better at predicting that. There was some research done over US Supreme Court judgments. 28,000 case outcomes were analyzed. Computers predicted the right outcome 72% of the time, or 71.9% of the time, if you wanted me to be more accurate. There was predictive models for the European Court of Human Rights, and their computers were 79% accurate at predicting outcomes. Now that's really impressive, and I think it's a game changer because there the computer wasn't just asked to look at legal issues, it was a combination of both legal and ethical issues. And we'll talk a little bit more about predictive modeling out of the sort of Gladwell reference to a 2017 piece of research done in the US in a minute. But it does seem to me that in certain circumstances, lawyers are good at predicting outcomes. That is, they can take a lot of data and predict an outcome. To what extent we can extrapolate that to say, well, look, if there's an 83% chance that that is the predicted outcome, that's enough to make a judicial determination. I don't know. I don't know whether that is enough. Certainly in a civil suit, we're looking at 51%, aren't we, as the boundary for whether or not to make a judicial determination. So 86.6% in this case does seem quite good. I think the other area that we wanted to look at analytical skills was about lie detection. Now, I'm not sure if this really is a lie detection machine. I pulled it off the internet again. I'm told that it is, but I think more importantly than the image, a lot of research has been done about lie detection. And I'm afraid to say that judges, well, no, that's not fair. Judges are as good as anyone else in the community at identifying lies. Judges are as good as anyone else in the community at identifying lies. Okay, that's great, right? It's about 50%. It's about 50%. Now, I'm told that the highest rate of identifying lies is with prisoners. Prisoners score much higher than anyone else in the community at actually seeing and calling out lies. And there is some evidence to suggest that the better liar you are, the more often you lie, the better you're able to call out lies. And you can see the logic in that. We certainly therefore wouldn't expect our judges to be very good at calling out lies if that correlation is true. But AI now has been shown by analyzing both the physiological and the physical signs able to identify lies at 99.9% accuracy. It can determine if witness evidence is accurate to 99.9%. It's pretty good analytical skills. It's pretty high compared to the human at 50%. We then get on to impartiality, and there's lots of talk about impartiality and bias and inbuilt bias and program bias and bias of the judiciary. I don't want to go there. I don't think it's a helpful conversation for today, but I do want to talk about human foibles, if you will, human imperfections. Now, this is a wonderful graph. It was a study done in 2011, I think, in Israel of the parole board, and it wanted to it wanted to look at the harshness of the decisions of the parole board. And what they worked out is just before the meal breaks and before the end of day, boy, did the parole board, were they tough, right? Boy, were they tough. When there was sugar shortage in the parole board, they were really mean. And then once it had some sugar, look, shot up again, less harsh decisions were coming out. Now, this piece of research did suggest that sugar levels do play an important role in how judges, these were parole boards, but nevertheless, in sort of taking on these important decisions about whether somebody would be released. Humans are not perfect. Now, AI doesn't need sugar. It does need electricity, I suppose, but a deficit of electricity doesn't cause it to behave quite the same way as humans. So when it comes to human imperfections, I don't think we should suggest that humans are perfect, nor would we. But equally, I think there are many areas where AI can perhaps level out human imperfection, particularly when it's related to things like this that we see, which is around sugar consumption, energy consumption, and the like. We then look at accuracy. This is the very famous LawGeeks study that was done. Quite an old piece of computing actually was used to compare 5 non-disclosure agreements. So they had 5 non-disclosure agreements. They had 20 US trained top quality lawyers actually from some big institutions, and they pitched the 20 lawyers to review the NDAs. There were 30 legal issues hidden within the NDAs across 3,213 clauses. These must have been really comprehensive NDAs, but 3,213 clauses contained 30 legal issues that needed to be identified. And they pitched these top quality 20 US lawyers against a fairly old piece of computing power. And what they found was that the lawyers did really well. The lawyers did really well. You know, we go back to the judges saying, I'd hope to be 80% accurate. Actually, the lawyers in this experiment were 85% accurate. They picked up 85% of the issues. It's good. It's not bad, right? That's not bad. In fact, the best lawyer got 94%, which is exceptional, really exceptional. However, the AI got 94% first time. That is, no lawyer could beat the AI, but the AI was significantly better than the average of the lawyers. The AI was more accurate. I think what's even more interesting is on speed. On average, it took the lawyers 92 minutes. On average, it took the lawyers 92 minutes to review the 5 NDAs and to note down their filings. This is a profession that charges by the hour. The AI managed to be more accurate and to complete the exercise in 26 seconds. Now, I accept that this is not judicial determination, but this is the review of documentation to come to a conclusion. And both on accuracy and speed, the technology proved better than 20 very smart legal minds. And this brings us on to the 2017 research, which is often quoted. I think it's so often quoted and so often questioned, it's difficult for me to form a view on it other than the essence of it. This was a research done by Cornell, Harvard, Stanford, and the University of Chicago called Human Decisions and Machine Predictions. And the hypothesis was that if we can't determine, you know, if a judge makes a decision, how do we tell if it's right or wrong? So they realized that for bail applications, that's somebody who says, look, before you decide whether I did it or not, let me live outside of the jail or put me in jail pending the trial. So for bail applications, you could tell if the judge got it right. And the judge had two things that they had to determine. It's much more complex than that, but effectively there were two determination points. If I let this person out on bail, will they commit another crime on bail? And secondly, will they come back for the next hearing, or will they vanish? Now, this was all done in the US, bear in mind. Will they come back? So there are two questions. Will they commit a crime out on bail, or will they come back to the next hearing? And the judges who had done this had done it for many years. They were really experienced judges. They had seen it and heard it all. And without exception, they agreed that the only way you could make fair bail decisions was by reading the file and looking at people and talking to them and asking them questions. You needed to experience them, because then you could bring the wisdom of the experience to bear on those two questions. Will they commit a crime when out on bail? Will they come back for the next hearing? And the technology that was being used, the AI that was being used, which wasn't very fancy, didn't have the benefit of seeing the person or talking to them. It just read the file, and it compared the file against hundreds of thousands of other files of people who'd been through the process. And what that study showed was that the technology was up to 42% more accurate than the judges. Up to 42% more accurate than the judges. Now that is significant. That was insofar as what the technology was able to, in its decision making, you could reduce crime by 24.7% with no change in jailing rates. That was, it was picking the right people to let out. And there was a 41.9% reduction in jailing rates with no increase in crime rates. The technology was getting it more accurate, better prediction than the judges. Now, as I say, this research is done, it's available, but it's interesting, right? It's very interesting that where you can empirically demonstrate whether a decision was right or not, the technology was that significantly better, if you will, at making that decision. So the last one is mercy. This is really hard. I think we would all probably agree that mercy and compassion and fairness and justice are not things at the moment that we would say AI is able to deliver on. It's really hard. There's this paper which is forthcoming from the university press, which suggests that AI can now be merciful and compassionate. But of all of the criteria for justice, mercy does seem to be, in my mind, one which the computers are going to struggle with, at least for a decent amount of time. So I think there is an opportunity for the use of AI in the judiciary. Let's look at the limitations. What might hold it back? Well, I think the first one is explainability. XAI, or explainable AI, is still to some extent in its infancy. So whilst I think we're seeing in China, particularly out of Hangzhou and in Shanghai, the use of technology which is able to explain the judicial rationale, that is, you can give the technology the case file and it will write a judgment. The judges in China tell me it's only 20% accurate. That is, the judgment, 80% of the work in the judgment still needs to be done by a human judge. Now, they don't mind investing the time in it because they know that over time the AI will get better. But at the moment, AI is not great at explaining how it got there. In fact, in many senses, AI is not even comfortable with the English language. We know from the Facebook, where they put two negotiation protocols together, that it didn't take long for the negotiation protocols to realize that English was a pretty duff language to negotiate in, and they started to create their own. And this was the output of one element of the negotiation. I can, I, everything else negotiates Bob, Alice negotiates back, bulls have zero to me, to me, to me, to me, to me, to me. Now that makes no sense to us, but clearly as two negotiation protocols, that was a more efficient way of negotiating. And until AI is able not to explain itself using this kind of terminology and can explain itself with reason written in the language of the jurisdiction, I think it's going to be hard for AI to take over the exclusive determination of judges. Next one, trust. Now, people say, well, no one will trust a computer. People want to hear justice delivered by a human. I'm not so sure on that. And I think the best example of why that may not be the case, certainly amongst young people, is the wonderful Georgia Tech emergency guide robot. Now, many of you will know this is one of my favorite experiments. This robot wasn't actually a robot, it was a remote controlled vehicle. It was absolutely hopeless. And they took 30, but for the purposes of the experiment, 26 were used. So take 26 students, they were all shown by this emergency guide robot down a corridor and into a room where, as far as they were concerned, they just had to fill out some papers. They had no idea they were in an experiment about trust and AI. And they went into the room, and as they were sitting in the room, so the robot had taken them down the corridor, and it had banged into the corridor. It had gone past the room they were meant to be going to. It was absolutely the most terrible robot to show them to the room. And each of the students experienced how terrible this robot was. But the students then, they get in the room, they close the door, and they start doing the thing that they thought that they were meant to be doing. And when they did that, the researchers then put smoke into the corridor and filled up the corridor and the room with smoke. And that's where 4 of the 30 participants either sat statically, terrified, or just pushed the emergency button and said, I want to get out of here. But the remaining 26, they left the room into the smoke-filled corridor. And as they looked up, they could see the green emergency exit sign, which pointed back to the direction that they came from. But there, standing before them, was the emergency guide robot. And the emergency guide robot's white wands were pointing in the opposite direction. What percentage of the students followed the robot, which clearly demonstrated itself to be hopeless on the way in, into a dark and smoke-filled corridor against the direction of the clear green emergency exit sign? 100%. Now, almost all the students were then convinced to jump over a blocked doorway, which had a sofa sort of shoved up blocking the doorway. A majority of students were convinced that they should jump over that because the robot was pointing in that direction. Well, my point is that there is this feeling, I think, more and more that we trust technology more than we even trust ourselves. So I'm not too sure that trust should be a limitation. The next limitation is policy, and I'll show you why I've got that flag. Policy, I think lawyers are generally regulated by lawyers. Elderly lawyers, let's call them senior lawyers, tend to regulate junior lawyers. The regulatory model for many countries is that, a law society is run by lawyers for lawyers. Discipline is done by lawyers for lawyers. And many lawyers make a lot of money out of the inefficiency of the justice system and the inefficiency of their firm model. And it's very interesting that 2019, the law firm of the year was Clifford Chance, an absolutely fabulous global, international traditional law firm. But 2020, it's Keystone Law, a decentralized, distributed, let's say modern, transparent, listed on the stock exchange law firm model. So we are seeing some transformation at a law firm at a law firm level, but at a judicial level, I still think that there is a policy to maintain the status quo. I think the policy, although we've heard wonderful words, say, from Geoffrey Voss, I think there's still a policy that steady as she goes is probably the right way forward. And that's no better embodied than in Article 22.1 of the GDPR regulations. As a matter of policy, it states in there that every citizen, EU citizen, has the right not to be subject to a decision based solely on automated processing, which produces legal effect. Automatic judging is out for the purposes of GDPR. But I think that reflects, the fact that in France it's a criminal offence, as I understand it, to use AI to predict case outcomes or court outcomes, tells us that policy is going to be quite a big limiting factor. And I think the last limiting factor for many is it's just simply terrifying. The concept of handing justice over to a computer is terrifying. We know humans, we understand humans are foible-based, have problems, might be under stress, may not have read the papers, maybe overworked, maybe ill. We understand all that and we accept it. We're not happy with it, right? And we don't use the system unless we absolutely have to. But computers? It's just scary. It's just scary. So I'll finish with, if I may, some predictions. The first is that when asked what people want from a justice system, no one said that they want to have a bigger fight. This was on the Hill survey, the Hague Institute survey. No one said that they want to spend a lot of money on lawyers. Nobody said they want to spend weeks in court. Nobody said they want to struggle with enforcement. What they said was, universally, tell me if I've got a leg to stand on. Tell me if there's something in my frustration and help me solve it. Tell me if I've got something that I should legitimately worry about, deal with, and help me solve my problem. And how do you want your problem solved? They were asked. Yeah, when I want it solved. And that could be 8:30 at night. Where do you want it solved? From home, from the office. How do you want it solved? I want it solved digitally. So we are going to see a move towards justice having to be delivered digitally when people want it and how people want it. That, I think, is coming, no question. So what will happen? Well, on the left-hand side, we've got the smashing of the spinning jenny. Do we think that lawyers and judiciaries are going to smash up court technology? Do we think that they're going to rip it apart, just as we saw when there was transformation of the cotton industry, this sort of fight against the technology, smash it up and destroy it? No, I don't think so. I don't think so at all. I think that many judges, and we've got one with us here today, embraces this, but with a necessary amount of caution. I don't think we're going to smash the spinning jenny of justice technology, but we are going to have the man with the red flag. And the man with the red flag, if for those of you remember, when the automobile was invented, it was decided it was a perilous invention. It was a terribly dangerous thing to have. Who knew what society would become if the automobile could prevail? The people who looked after horses and did horseshoe repairs were terrified of it. They thought it was awful. And there was even a sense that if you went over 4 miles an hour, the speed of the air entering the mouth would cause you to suffocate. So the limit for cars was set at 4 miles an hour. And to enforce it, a man had to walk in front with a red flag, rendering the automobile effectively useless. And I think that's what many judiciaries will try and do with justice technology, with the use of AI within justice. I think they'll embrace it wholeheartedly, but perhaps keep putting red flags in the way, keep requiring human intervention at the front end, keep slowing it down, because they want stability and they want to understand it first. And that may or may not be considered by many to be a good or a bad thing. Depends what you think of 100 million backlog cases, whether that's a good or a bad thing. So my prediction is that we're going to see the rise of the private sector. We've already seen amazing companies like Modria, which was Colin Rule, who'd invented dispute resolution for eBay and PayPal, 60 million disputes a year, I'm told. Modria, a court process, but yes, a technology process, no AI at all, but just a process to help people resolve family disputes outside of court. Out of 6, on average, 6 matters that would go to a judge, 5 of them can be resolved beforehand by Modria. RDO, which I'm affiliated with, doing an amazing job of resolving disputes online. We're seeing JAW and the resolution of smart contract disputes. People claim what they call the democratization of dispute resolution. And there's an amazing piece of research out of Hong Kong University on how Alibaba is using the wisdom of the crowd and game theory to help resolve disputes across that platform. The private sector is really starting to get involved now in helping people to solve their problems. The next prediction is that as we see court technology rise, it will come from China. We know that they're doing incredible. Now, we're not going to get into a discussion about China and all those political, and that's not the point. The point is that at a court level, they're implementing really world-class technology, really incredible technology. And China sits on really important panels like the Standing International Forum of Commercial Courts. It sits on a number of international judicial panels where it's starting to share the ability of technology to help the citizen get justice, to open up access to the 95%, to solve the justice chasm. I feel that a lot of court technology will be driven out of innovation that takes place in China, which is carefully monitored by other judiciaries, but where it's found to be helpful to improve access to justice and speed of justice, to help judges do their job. I think that we will start to see it either being replicated by companies in the West or to some extent licensed out of China. And my last prediction is this, that with backlogs, with COVID, we can't continue to do what we've always done. There's a saying something like, if you stupidity is keep on doing the same thing and expecting a different result. We can't hope that our systems, our judicial systems, can improve with a tweak here and a tweak there. We can't think that automation is going to be the answer to the tsunami of crisis which has befallen the justice sector in so many countries because of COVID. And my prediction is that we will move to an environment which I think Geoffrey Voss calls the funnel, but in a broader sense, we start with triage. So disputes can come into the system, and the court of first instance, if you will be AI powered, and it will give a decision. It will say, with an 82% likelihood, this is going to be the outcome, and therefore this is my decision. For civil matters, I'm talking here, not criminal, with a higher standard. So for civil matters that come in, this is the greatest chance of the outcome, therefore this is the outcome. And I think that that will be an effective triage. Even if it only solved 5% of problems for Brazil, that's 5 million problems resolved. But there would be an automatic right from the technology, from the determination, if you will, of the technology, an automatic right to a human, either sitting at a court of appeal level or sitting at what might be a sort of slightly higher level of the court of first instance. And you may well say, and I'll finish with this, you may well say, well, everyone that doesn't like the decision will appeal. When we set up the small claims tribunal in the Dubai International Financial Centre courts, we had the provision that you had an automatic right to appeal an outcome, an automatic right to appeal an outcome. I think about only 7% of people actually appealed the outcome. Why? Because the system we set up was transparent, was fair. People felt they'd had their say, that they were able to upload what they needed to upload. And most of the time, we were pushing for settlement. We were helping people come to an accommodation. We were using technology to help them steer towards an outcome that they agreed, rather than giving a judicial determination. Something that the technology does fantastically well, this asymmetry of interaction between warring parties. So I think there is evidence to suggest that if we could triage with AI at, if you will, a court of first instance stage, with an automatic right to appeal, we will do away with more cases than we will create. I think if the private sector continues to push hard, I think they will pick up the slack of the 95%. And many people are concerned about that. Should we privatize justice? What happens to precedent if people are going to the private sector? How do we know who's setting the balance in the AI between claimant and defendant? Certainly, if I was a technology platform, if I need more people to sell on the platform, I would steer my judge to be more seller friendly. And if I wanted more buyers on the platform, I might steer my judge the other way. Is that what we want from justice? And who sets that dial? Who sets that policy? All sorts of problems with it. But nevertheless, I do think that judiciaries will move, led in part by China, led in part by advances in the private sector. I think judiciaries will move to AI judging at a junior level, but we will never, certainly not in my lifetime, do away with the need for the mercy and the compassion that's brought into the arena by human judges. Thank you.